Tracy Bode here from Zyteq and Sarah Solomon sitting here right next to me, trusted OT. So sorry for the lack of microphone, which meant that everybody missed the introduction. So I'll do the introduction retrospectively, like now. So we're having our hands-on review of Zyteq's access devices today. So we're covering all the devices, or many of the devices that offer alternative access. So in our previous webinars, we discussed how to evaluate access in relation to an individual who has difficulty with the standard keyboard or mouse or touch screen and so on. And here we're reviewing the available devices. So we know it's important to start with the person and matching the technology to the person, to use Marsha Shearer's framework. And as this next step, we know that you want to understand all the devices that are available on the market. So that's the purpose of our mini-series of webinars. And if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box and you can tag them as questions, because we will have time for Sarah to answer all of your burning questions at the end. And that's really the ideal use of the webinar. So you can ask your burning questions about particular products or particular clients or particular movements and matching them to the clients. Coming right up, and here's our next segment. Switch access would be one of the earliest and lowest cost alternative access methods available. You can use a switch to control a toy, a computer, a nurse call button, a mobile device, a communication device, and most electronic devices. So how do you go about finding the right switch for your client, Sarah?
It's important to find a switch that is easy to use, consistent, reliable, and not fatiguing. Work with your client to find the best movement that allows them to activate the switch. This is called your switch site. The switch site could be any part of the body. Once you've chosen the best site for the switch to be activated, you then choose the switch that matches that movement. For example, this is head activation of a switch. This is a good example of knee activation of a switch.
In our first webinar, How to Choose the Best Electronic Assistive Technology, we used some assessment processes, and this one shows how the switch site is recorded for the individual. So we have the switch site and the switch type, the switch mount, and the scanning options all recorded here and considered as part of the evaluation process. This was through the Matching Assistive Technology to Child Augmentative Communication Evaluation Simplified assessment process. But these principles apply to switch evaluation through all assistive technology processes. There are so many switches available, and here is a small selection of our simple mechanical switches. So some are wired, some are wireless, some have a USB connection and plug straight into a computer. Generally, you will need a switch interface for most devices. So the switches we have here, we have the Jelly Bean and the red twist switch from AbleNet, the Buddy button, and they come in various colours, the Spec switch, the Pico buttons from Praetorian, the Smoothie is the wired one, and the Simply Works switches are the wireless versions. The I switches and the Tread switch, the Click switch, the Micro Light, the Zygo Lolly switch, and the push button switch. So the switches are generally round or rectangular, they have different diameters, and there are other features about them that vary. So how do we know which one is most suited to our client's switch site?
So once you've decided where the switch site is, there are other factors to consider. They might be the surface area of how big the switch needs to be. They may need to be waterproof. They may need to be heavy duty if there's a lot of force going through, such as if someone is using it with their foot. Or if someone only has a very small amount of movement, you may need a switch that requires only a tiny little bit of force to activate it. So when you're looking at choosing the right switch for your client, the first thing you can look at is the size and the shape required. As you can see, some are small, some are very big. The other thing to look at is the force required. Some take a lot of force and some take a tiny little bit of force. One other thing to look at is the activation area. Some activate on the side, some activate all the way through, some activate just on one end and not on the other.
To check the force required to activate the switch, you can use a simple kitchen scale. Put the switch on top and note where the switch activates, and you can see how many grams of force the switch requires to be activated. Here we have a range of specialist switches. We have the string switch, the finger button switch. This is the candy corn proximity switch. And these are wobble switches from different companies. This is a ribbon switch from AbleNet and the Zyteq leaf switch. We also have here the new Cento contactless puff switch from QHAR and the SIP puff switch from Zyteq.
These specialist switches have some unique features. These two switches both require assistance to have them put into place. This one needs the finger looped in and this one needs to be velcroed onto the person's hand. This switch has some excellent features, including easy ability to be mounted, plus some nice auditory feedback. Because it's a contactless switch, the person knows when it's been activated, especially if they can't see it. Another feature to look at is how much force, but also how far the switch needs to be pushed before the activation occurs. When you've chosen a switch, it's also important to make sure that that switch remains secure. Some switches come with their own mount, like this sip and puff switch. Some can be mounted on mounting arms, and this ensures that the switch doesn't move from the place it needs to be. Sometimes it's useful to have your switch on a movable arm, which means it's flexible for the person to be able to move when they move their position. So this is the AbleNet universal switch mount that comes with a universal multi-use switch mount plate. This clamp is a very durable and robust clamp. This is the BJ105 sensitive dual switch mounted on the AbleNet universal mount. This is a two-way switch that's good to be activated with chin, cheek, or even your tongue.
To summarise this section on switches, we can use switches for a whole range of activities, from mouse click to scanning to activating toys, computer access, communication devices, nurse call buttons, wheelchair controls, environmental control, and really most electronic assistive technology. So we start with the individual and finding a movement that's easy to use, consistent, and not fatiguing. Once we work out the switch site, we try to find a switch to match that switch activation site and the person's movement. Check out the specifications of the switch. This will include the size, weight, connection type, activation area, the activation force, the feedback that the switch gives, whether that's proprioceptive, auditory, visual, or all three, the travel of the switch before and after activation, the mounting options and any special features, for example, if it's waterproof or some other feature. For more information on switches, you can find details on our website and the manufacturer's websites. This segment is about mouse emulators and mouse alternatives, a hands-on review of the devices available. Mouse emulation or mouse alternatives are an alternative to the standard keyboard and mouse or touchscreen. This includes devices such as joysticks, trackballs and trackpads, head tracking devices, and eye gaze. but we won't be covering eye gaze in this segment as that has its own segment. To use a mouse emulator or a mouse alternative, the person operating the computer will need a movement to control the cursor and the mouse emulator device, a means of selecting, usually dwell or a switch to select. So if you can imagine, the device is controlling the cursor around an on-screen keyboard, and then when you land on the item you want, you need a means to select. So you also need compatible software, which will usually be some type of on-screen keyboard with specialised settings that allow you to control the dwell time or the selection method, in addition to some other settings such as mouse speed and range and so on. Here we have some examples of some mouse emulators that are usually controlled by hand. First is the Praetorian Enabler trackball. The large trackball controls the cursor, and inbuilt recessed buttons are used for mouse right and left click, or external switches can be used for the mouse clicks. Next is the Orbitrack by Praetorian. This is a unique device, more of a trackpad, where you can control the direction and speed of the mouse by a soft touch. This requires only a minimal movement. Next, we have the Enabler Pro trackball and the Enabler Pro joystick. These are very heavy-duty controls that also have the option of inbuilt mouse clicks using the recessed buttons or external switches for mouse selection. This is the Big Track trackball by AbleNet, which has inbuilt buttons for left and right mouse click or external switches as well, and a very large, easy to access trackball.
Both of these devices allow for head tracking control of a computer or a communication device. This one is called a SmartNav. This one is called a Tracker Pro. They both control the cursor of your computer or the communication device by connecting with the reflective dot that can be worn on your nose, your head, or some glasses. So they do require line of sight between the dot and the camera. So positioning is very important. The cursor movement is by moving your head, and the cursor will follow the movement of your head. The mouse click can be done through inbuilt software in your computer with your AAC software, or by separate standalone mouse clicking software. So selection or mouse click can also be done with a switch which plugs directly into the head tracker device. That means when you want to do a click, you activate the switch. This is the QHAR Zono gyroscopic mouse. This is the mouse, and this is the receiver. This is another mouse control option. The difference with this mouse replacement option to the other hands-free replacement options of the SmartNav and the Tracker Pro is that this is gyroscopic, so it doesn't need line of sight. Now, the benefit of that is that you can use this device in many positions because you don't actually need line of sight. So if the person's lying in bed and their computer is off to the side, it will still work. It will also self-regulate on where the mouse is in relation to you. It doesn't have to be mounted on your head. It also can be velcroed to your hand, arm, knee or foot.
Here's a replay of the short video that accompanied our presentation at the Errata Assistive Technology Conference in 2016. The aim of our presentation was to show a comparison between Tracker Pro, SmartNav 4 and the QHAR Zono gyroscopic mouse, all used for head tracking. So we can compare the head movement required through our fast speed video frames. So to conclude this segment on mouse emulation, you can see that there's a wide variety of devices providing mouse emulation. This means you can use an on-screen keyboard to do everything on a computer that would otherwise be carried out with a keyboard and mouse or touch screen. So it's a matter of finding the right device to match the movements of the person who will be using this alternative device. For more details and hire and trial details, please check our website and we'll see if we have something to suit.
These are eye gaze cameras. We have the Alea Technologies IntelliGaze camera and the Visual Interaction MyGaze camera. Both of these cameras can be used to control your computer just by looking at the screen.
This webinar is a hands-on review about the eye gaze cameras available from Zyteq. So to start, we need to know a little bit more about eye gaze because it's not just about the eye gaze cameras. There are three elements of eye gaze. There is the camera hardware. There's also software. The cameras often have their own software or driver. It's really more than a driver. And then there is specialised software which is specifically written to be compatible with the eye gaze technology. The third element is the person and their individual features and characteristics and preferences and their positioning. The positioning of the whole system is crucial for the success of eye gaze. The specialised eye gaze software we use is Look to Learn, which is an introductory suite of activities for learning and playing with eye gaze. The Grid 3, which is a very comprehensive piece of software at its heart for communication, but also offering accessible apps and full computer control. There's also Mind Express 4, which offers introductory eye gaze activities right through to full computer control and communication also. The positioning and individual part of eye gaze is very dependent on mounts for many people. A person may sit upright and in the midline and require just a table stand, but for any more individualised positioning, such as reclining, specific mounts are required so the system can be positioned correctly for the success of eye gaze. We won't be dealing with all of those elements today. Today we're dealing with the eye gaze camera and their features.
This is the IntelliGaze camera, which has three modes of operation. The assisted mode is designed for early level or early learning eye gaze access, and it's very simple to operate mouse control. There is the AAC mode, which then includes integration with communication software such as Grid 3 and Mind Express 4. And at the top of the range there is the 360 mode, and this includes more advanced and sophisticated Windows control. Each version is upgradable from the assisted mode through to the 360 mode, so you can purchase the different levels as required. The IntelliGaze camera has the operation centre, and this is where I can calibrate. In the assisted mode, it's designed for touchscreen access for support people. I can also change in my status monitor to a video mode to help with positioning. I can unpause the camera and we're ready to go. This is now the AAC version of the IntelliGaze software, and here we're integrated with the Grid 3. This is the IntelliGaze 360 with more advanced computer control through the IntelliGaze's own software. This is the MyGaze camera. The MyGaze camera provides mouse control for early learning of eye gaze. It is also integrated with Grid 3 for computer control and communication. This is the MyGaze control centre where I can calibrate and change my settings. This is Grid 3, Vocabulary for Life.
I would like biscuits. I would like biscuits.
The eye gaze cameras we offer, the IntelliGaze and MyGaze, are available as individual camera modules. They plug into Windows computers using the USB cables, or they are available already set up and installed as complete systems. These are generally designed to be communication systems. They are complete Windows computers, also can be used as full accessible systems for internet browsing and other computer control. This is the GridPad i11, which is available with MyGaze or IntelliGaze. The GridPad i13 is available with IntelliGaze. The Tellus 5 IntelliGaze is our most powerful Windows computer, and that is supplied with the IntelliGaze 360 camera. The all-in-one IntelliGaze is a mains-powered computer with a 21-inch screen, supplied with IntelliGaze. People often ask which camera is best or which would be most suitable. The cameras these days are very sophisticated and they are quite similar in their technical specifications. The preference of one system over another may come down to unique differences in the physiology of the eye or individual differences. So it's usually necessary to try the different cameras and see if one is preferable over another for an individual. It may be that environment has an impact. We find that the IntelliGaze is very accommodating of brightly lit rooms. So you'll most likely be interested to trial a device to be able to compare the different eye gaze cameras. For more details and for hire and trial information and for more details of all of our systems, please visit our website at www.zyteq.com.au.
How are you today? Could you explain to me?
So, welcome back after our videos. We will see how we go. It's our live feed now. It'll be a little bit delayed, so we'll see how this goes and check out whether we have any questions. So, Sarah, you had some examples of some juicy access challenges that you can explain to us.
So one example that comes to mind is a gentleman who had no hand function but quite good head function, but he found using Dwell very inefficient with his Tracker Pro. So I looked at where his movement was reliable and efficient. We realised he had some good knee movement. So I ended up mounting a smoothie switch on a small mount attached to his wheelchair so he could move the cursor with his head via the Tracker Pro, but the switch click or the choice of what he wanted the mouse to do was by the movement of his knee. He became very, very good at using his computer and he regained full control over his computer. So I think it's a matter of really looking at where the person's movement is reliable, matching the switch to the movement and making sure the switch is mounted securely, because you want to make sure that all switching is, yes, not effortful and not fatiguing and not adding to the things they have to learn.
So do you find the difference between Dwell to select and using a switch to select is very different?
In my experience, it is probably quicker to use a switch to click if possible. However, that's not always possible. Dwell to learn is a little bit, takes a bit longer to learn. Some people might start with a longer dwell time and then as they get better at it, reduce the dwell time. But in general, if they have a point where they can use a switch somewhere, had people use switches on their feet, their knees, just a little switch in their fingers, in conjunction with a head mouse, so either the Tracker Pro, the Smart Nav, or the head tracking like the QHAR, they will use the switch to start with.
Okay. Any other examples you'd like to share?
Certainly using switches is something I think just takes assessment like anything else. Look at what the person wants to do. Work out what is the right switch for them to use it with. It's an assessment process like anything else. If someone's using a head mouse, then obviously the switch is not good mounted near their head. Because when they hit the switch, the cursor will move, it'll go off the target.
Right.
So look at the person, see what they want to do, choose a switch that matches their movement. It can be really efficient for some people.
Okay. Oh, we do have a question. Thanks, Zara. Do the grid pad and tellers have switch input capabilities to swap when eyes become tired? That's a good question. And also, just so you know, that our next webinar later this afternoon is on all the communication devices. And really the whole point with those is that they are so much more than communication devices. They're really complete systems that do everything. And all of the devices that have eye gaze also have built-in switch ports, so you can use switch input as well. And there's also USB ports, so you could plug in Tracker Pro, SmartNav or QHAR if a person has changing access needs. So the answer to your question is yes, and I'm not sure if it's just a matter of changing to switches when people get tired. What would you say, Sarah?
So if someone is using eye gaze in a way that is they're hitting the target that they need to do, like you would a mouse. So the eye gaze is replacing the mouse movement. If you were to use a switch instead of eye gaze, you'd have to change the software into switch scanning mode. And that's actually slower, and it's a totally different way of looking at how the software is set up. But yes, it can happen.
And you can actually change between access modes, and
yes.
in the grid 3 you can rest one access mode, can't you?
But you have to change the software knowing what the access mode is.
Yeah. So I suppose there's a couple of different things there. So you could use a switch in conjunction with eye gaze to make the selections instead of dwell.
Yes.
That would be one way of using it. Certainly some people we know people who use a switch and scanning when they're out and about because it's maybe a little bit more portable than your eye gaze, and you can use it out in the bright sun.
Yeah. Especially when someone is using the grid 3 where they have lots of pre-saved phrases, to use switch scanning in that situation where you're not typing in every single word can be really efficient for some people. So they'll have a whole lot of stuff pre-saved, so they just have to scan onto that cell, press the button, and it says everything they want to say.
So for different positions in the home or in and out of the home, you might use your different access methods. And certainly that's a great point, Zara, that to have a range of access methods built into the one device means you've got all those options available to you. Excellent. Well, that looks like it for our questions. So we would appreciate any feedback or comments. So I'll leave the webinar just open for another few minutes, and we'd love to hear your feedback, or if you've got any other questions you have thought of, please feel free to type them in the chat box. But we'll sign off now and just leave you with our still screenshot, and hope to catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.